It's time to talk about systemd, the technology that some people in the Linux community just seem to love to hate. Now, I'm going to spare you from the political side of systemd in this video. This is the Linux Essentials series after all. But what I am going to do is show you guys how to use the systemctl command to start, stop, and restart units, and also some other examples as well. I think by the end of this video, you will know all the things that you need to know to manage the running units on your Linux server or workstation. But before we get into that, I want to mention today's sponsor, Linode. Linode has been doing cloud computing since 2003, which is actually before Amazon Web Services was even a thing. On Linode's platform, you can get your server up and running in minutes, and they include all of the popular distributions such as CentOS, Debian, Ubuntu, Fedora, and get this, also Arch Linux. And let's be honest, what could be better than a Linux cloud server provider that allows you to tell all of your friends, I run Arch? Linode has multiple server plans available to make any app scalable and flexible. You can use it to host a blog, set up a VPN server, a Minecraft server, or you could do what I did and set up a website for your YouTube channel, because the official website for Learn Linux TV runs on Linode. And Linode offers 24/7 365 support regardless of plan size, so you can get live help from a real person when you need it. New users can get started right now with $100 in credit towards a new account, and I highly recommend you check them out because Linode is awesome. And thanks to Linode for their continued support of Learn Linux TV. I really appreciate it. And now, let's get into the main topic at hand and check out the systemctl command. Alright, so let's see some examples of systemd. On my end, I'm currently running Fedora on my laptop, but it really doesn't matter which distribution you are using on your end. And the reason why that doesn't matter so much is because systemd is used in quite a few Linux distributions. In addition to Fedora, it's also used in Debian, Ubuntu, Arch Linux, CentOS, Alma Linux, Rocky Linux, Linux Mint, OpenSUSE, SUSE Enterprise. Now, all of those were just off the top of my head. I could go on, but I think you get the idea. This is one of those situations where you're about to learn a set of commands that'll serve you quite well across various distributions. But before we get started, though, we have to have something to manage with systemd. We need an example service. So what I'm going to do on my end is I'm going to install Apache. And if you are on a Fedora or CentOS system, then you can go ahead and run the same command that I'm about to run right now. On the distributions that I've just mentioned, this is the command right here. Don't worry if you are running Debian or Ubuntu. I'll give you that command as well here in a moment. I'm going to go ahead and get this installed. And apparently I must have already installed it. As you can see here, the package httpd is already installed. It's the latest version, so I should be good to go on that. If you are running Ubuntu or Debian, then you should be able to run this variation of the command. The package manager on Debian and Ubuntu is different. Those distros use apt, as you see here. Linux Mint, that's the same thing. But the package name is also different on those platforms. They have it as Apache 2. So I'm not going to press enter on my end, obviously, because I'm running Fedora. This command will not work on Fedora. But you should be able to use either the first command or the second command, depending on your distro. And if you're using something completely different than anything I've mentioned, then all you should have to do is consult the documentation for your chosen distribution. Now, at this point, depending on your distribution, Apache might already be working. So what I'll do is switch over here to a browser, and I'm going to type localhost in the address bar just like that. It's not going to work on my end because Apache is not actually running. But on Debian and Ubuntu and some other distributions as well, those will often start the process for you automatically. So it's possible that when you enter a localhost in the browser of your computer, you might actually see the result. And if you are actually managing a Linux server, then of course localhost won't work. You could just type in the IP address of that server, and if Apache is running, you will see the default web page. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, the whole point of systemd, among many other things, is to help you manage what is running on your server, laptop, workstation, or whatever you are running Linux on. It allows you to easily manage running services. Now, systemd actually refers to services as units. A lot of times I'll slip and I'll say services or daemons. Those are other terms that mean essentially the same thing. But regardless of your favorite terminology, systemd names services as units. Just keep that in mind. So right now, we can type systemctl or systemctl. That's the chosen command that is used to manage the services on your machine. And if you press enter with no options or arguments, there's going to be a lot of output. I can keep scrolling and scrolling. I'm just pressing enter. And these are all the services that are running in the background. But specific to our current use case, we've installed Apache, and on my end, it's not even running. And that brings me to the first example that I would like to show you. Systemctl status. This allows you to check the status of something that's running in the background or something that should or might be running in the background. Now on my end, I know that the process name, at least on Fedora, CentOS, and similar distributions, is httpd, just like you see here. If you are running on Debian or Ubuntu, it's going to be Apache 2, essentially the same name as the package that you installed. But like I mentioned, this variation of the systemctl command allows us to check the status of something, the status of a unit, and as you can see here, the Apache unit is not running. And that makes sense because I wasn't able to access the web page either. Now I just made the font a little bit smaller. There was something that was fairly important in the output, and I want to make sure that I mention it. So again, systemctl status and then the name of the unit. And what I wanted to show you is that it says disabled right here. So from the output, we can see that it's inactive and dead. That explains why I can't access the default web page for Apache. So that means it's not running right now. But also right here, it says disabled. A unit that is disabled will not automatically start when your server or your Linux machine boots up. So if I was to leave this as disabled and this was, for example, a web server, then this particular web server would need me to log in and manually start Apache every time I boot it up. And that's not really something that I want to do. So what I'm going to do is enable it because I wouldn't want to be in a situation where I restart a web server and then forget to actually start the web server process. So let's go ahead and enable the service right now. So in order to actually make changes, we'll either need to be running as root or we can use sudo, then systemctl. We're going to be using that command quite a bit. And then the keyword enable. We want to enable a unit. And then we type the name of the unit that we would like to enable. In my case, again, that's httpd. It could be Apache 2 for you if you are running on Debian or Ubuntu. But anyway, I'll press enter. And there we go. So if I check the status, we can see that it's actually enabled. So if I was to restart my computer, then Apache would automatically start. And that's great, but maybe I don't want to restart my computer just to get Apache running. If this was a production server, then I probably especially won't want to restart it. So what should we do? So for that, I will type sudo systemctl yet again, and the keyword is going to be start. We want to start a unit, and then you type the name of the unit. Easy enough so far. And if I check the status, we can see that it's active and it's running. It's enabled because we did enable it. Something that's also pretty cool is down here, we have some example log entries for the unit. You may not always see this. Sometimes some units require sudo in order to see all of the detail here on the screen. You don't actually need sudo to simply check the status of a unit, whether or not it's running. But sometimes some of the output might be hidden if you don't use sudo. In this case, it doesn't really matter. We see everything here, so nothing is hidden. Now, the thing is, Apache still won't work in the case of Fedora or CentOS because there's often a firewall that blocks it from being accessed, even localhost, believe it or not. So I'm going to fix that real quick. This isn't a tutorial on firewalls, but this is just one of those things. Sometimes you do actually have to manage the firewall. So I just entered the firewall command for allowing the HTTP service. And let's see if we have any different result now when we go to access Apache on this instance. And I had to remove the S in HTTP because this is not a secure site. I haven't actually added a certificate. But anyway, you can see that the default Fedora test page has displayed in my browser. So if I go back to my terminal, we can do the exact opposite of starting the unit. We can also stop the unit. And this is going to play out exactly the way that you think this is going to play out. I stop the service, and now the page is no longer accessible. Now, speaking of opposites, we enabled this unit before, but we can also disable it as well. So now the unit is disabled, and also it's not running anymore. And the reason why I did that, and it's not just to show you stop and disable, I wanted to show you another trick that I've picked up as well. Because as you know, we can enable a unit by typing the keyword enable and then the name of the unit. But what we can also do is add the -- now option to it as well, which is actually not only going to just enable the unit, it's also going to start it as well. And as you can see, I was able to start Apache and enable it in one shot. All right, so you just saw an example of a server application, a web server, something that is going to run in the background and be accessible for whoever has access to the server. But in some cases, you might actually want a systemd unit to run only for a particular user. And to better understand that, let's see an example. Back in the terminal, let's install yet another package, and the package that we'll be installing is called Syncthing. And Syncthing is an amazing utility that allows you to synchronize files between two or more computers. It's actually my file synchronization utility of choice. But I'm not going to go into too much detail about Syncthing itself. I have an entire tutorial that's all about Syncthing if you want to learn more about it. But I just figured it would be a good example of an application that you may want to run on a per-user basis. After all, if you want to synchronize your files and not the files of other users on the system, then you'll probably want the service to run under your user. Now, whether or not the package for Syncthing is available on your chosen distribution, well, that depends on the distribution. I think by now it is available on most distributions, but if you don't have Syncthing available on your chosen distribution, then don't worry about it. It doesn't so much matter what we're running. It's more about how we actually run a unit as a particular user. So first of all, what I'm going to do is run sudo dnf install and then syncthing. And if you are on Debian or Ubuntu, you should be able to run apt install syncthing. Pretty much the same difference. I'll press enter. And syncthing is available. And it's installed. Now let's first check the status of Syncthing itself. And you might think that the command stops there, but what I'm actually going to do is, in addition to the name of the unit, I'm going to type @ and then the name of the user that I want to have it run as. And of course, I haven't started it or enabled it yet, so it should show disabled and stopped. And that's exactly the case. It's disabled, and it's also inactive. Now, Syncthing on Fedora, at least, isn't going to really recognize trying to run it as a server-wide application. I mean, you can, and there's different systemd units that you can install for this purpose. But as you can see here, checking the status of just Syncthing isn't really something that you can do. And this may differ from one distribution to another. But the main takeaway is that you can target a specific user by typing @ and then the username. Now, I just showed you how to check the status of the systemd unit for Syncthing in regards to a specific user. Now let's go ahead and start it as that user. So I'm going to type sudo systemctl enable syncthing @ and then the name of the user that I want it to run as. In this case, my user. And if we check the status, we should see that it is now enabled, which it is. And I forgot to add the -- now option so I can manually start it up. And we'll check the status again. And we can see that it's running. Now, as a spoiler, the Syncthing service runs under port 8384. So I already have localhost right here, so I should be able to type :8384. And there it is. I am actually running Syncthing on my laptop right now, which is pretty cool. Now, if you are running this on a server, it's not actually going to allow you to hit the web console unless you configure it to allow you to hit the web console. So if this step failed, then don't worry about it. The main thing is that we were able to run a systemd unit as a particular user, which will be something that you may want to do from time to time. But let's go ahead and take a look at the systemd unit file for Syncthing. So I'm going to go into user lib systemd and then system. And we have quite a few services here. Going to scroll up a bit. And then we have it right here, syncthing @.service. So what I'm going to do is open that up in an editor. And here it is. Now it's telling me at the bottom that this file is unwritable, and that's just because I didn't use sudo. If I'm going to show you guys something, I don't want to accidentally make changes to it unless I really want to. But we can see some information here about the actual unit itself. And if you dive deeper into systemd, then you'll be looking at files just like this, or maybe even creating your own, going over all of the possibilities that you can have in a systemd unit file is beyond the scope of this particular video, but I'm going to give you some highlights right now. On the second line here, we have a description, which is pretty self-explanatory. And then we have a string for documentation, which in this case is just asking us to check the man pages. Anyway, we have this right here, which is called after. And this is pretty important for something like Syncthing because we really wouldn't want Syncthing to start before our network is even up and running. If you think about it, when you start your Linux server, laptop, workstation, or whatever you have, it's going to start all of the units one after another as it comes online. Now, if we left this to chance, we could have Syncthing starting before the network, which means it's probably going to fail because Syncthing wants a network connection. After all, it's a tool you can use to sync files over the network, so it's pretty much useless if we don't have a network. So here, we're telling systemd that we only want this particular unit to start after the network is already up and running. So if you have a unit file that depends on something else, this is actually a good practice. We have user set to be a variable here. Essentially, it's whatever user you run it against. And the line here for exec start is basically just telling systemd what command we want it to run when this unit starts up. So we have user bin syncthing. That's where syncthing is on the file system. And then we have some options there. And then we're telling it if for some reason syncthing stops working, then we want it to go ahead and restart. So if it fails, restart it. And we have a bunch more options here. And I'm not going to go over every single option here. Like I mentioned, I'm not going to go into full detail into systemd unit files. That could be a video of and by itself. And here we can see that this is a multi-user target. So by looking at this, you might be under the impression that multi-user.target is where we define that we want to run this as a user, but that's not actually the case. Essentially, what this means is that we really don't need a GUI for this. Syncthing is something that runs in the background. And an alternative to this could be graphical.target, which would mean that we want a graphical user interface started up, but again, Syncthing doesn't require that. So we're just simply going to require multi-user and not graphical. Now let's look at another command when it comes to systemd. Earlier in the video, I showed you another command where I simply ran systemctl by itself, and that gave me a very long list of service files here. But they're not just service files, there's actually much more to it than that. I'm going to show you a more graceful way of listing the service files that are on the system. As you can see here, we have an entire option that's dedicated to listing unit files. And specifically, we want to list unit files that are of type service. And you know what? I think the output of this command looks a lot better than the command I gave you near the start of the video. In fact, you can even see the state of the service itself. In the second column, it tells you whether or not it's enabled. And then in the third column, it tells you what the vendor preset is. And vendor preset, what that means is whether or not the systemd unit is desired to be started automatically as soon as you install the package for that utility. If a vendor preset is disabled, then that means as soon as you install the package for that utility, then the systemd unit will not be enabled. If the vendor preset is enabled, then as soon as you install the package for that utility, then that systemd unit is already going to be enabled right from the get-go. And I can go ahead and just hold down Enter and just keep scrolling through these. As you can see, we have quite a few services here on our system. But you get the idea. We were able to run this command right here to list the unit files that we have here on the system. Now, there's a couple other examples I would like to give you as well. I can't believe I almost forgot to talk to you about the restart option. And it's probably self-explanatory, but restart is going to do exactly what you think it's going to do. It's going to restart the unit. So with this command right here, Apache, in this case, is going to go down, and then it's going to come right back up. And this is something that you would do if you changed the configuration file for a unit. You'd want to restart the unit to take advantage of the new settings. Now, when it comes to Apache and many other services as well, we also have another option that does almost the same thing. We have an option for reload as well. What's the difference? Well, basically, if we restart Apache, like I mentioned, it's going to go down, and then it's going to come right back up. But not all changes require a full restart of the unit. A reload will actually keep the unit running. It's not going to go down, but it will actually take advantage of any new settings that you've added in the configuration. Now keep in mind that not all changes to settings are compatible with a reload. Sometimes you actually do need to restart the unit. Now, reload is preferred anytime you can use it, because if you were to restart Apache and people were on your website, then they would actually get disconnected from your website and they would need to reconnect to the website. Again, sometimes you can't help it, sometimes reload will not work, but anytime you can use reload, it's recommended. And reload is very common when it comes to web servers. So there you go. That was my video on systemctl, part of systemd. I hope it was helpful. And if you did find it helpful, make sure you click that like button because that lets YouTube know that you want to see more content just like this. And also be sure to subscribe because I'll have some awesome content here very soon. I can't wait to show you guys what I have in store for this channel. Anyway, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it.